everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Divorce and Separation Coach podcast. This week, we're going to talk about second marriages, and in particular, how you go about protecting your assets. Now, by definition, second marriages arrive later in life. A lot of people already have children, want to protect their children's rights to their assets, but also want to make sure that the significant assets they're bringing into the marriage at that stage are protected. So to talk about this, I've invited Ben Glassman. Ben leads the family and divorce practice at Evelyn Partners from the London office, and he specializes in the financial implications of divorce and separation. With over 20 years of experience as a chartered financial planner and a fellow of the Chartered Insurance Institute, Ben is known for his expertise in helping clients and their legal representatives navigate the complexities of untangling finances during what can be a very unsettling time. Ben, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, Chloe, it's lovely seeing you. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm looking forward to this conversation because this is something that I'm seeing a lot of lately. For some reason, there's been a surge of people approaching me, at the end of a first marriage, but about to engage in a second. And I think when you've gone through a divorce once, you are much more aware of the importance of planning and protecting assets and thinking a step ahead in case things don't go as well as you were hoping. So from your perspective and really working on the financial side of things, what are the main financial considerations that people should be looking at before entering into a second marriage?
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. As I said, you've already highlighted very clearly. I've worked in this space for quite a long time, and so a lot of my clients that I've worked with through divorce clearly have got remarried, and so they go in with a lot more focus on planning and to avoid the mistakes that they had the first time round, or even the second time round. And I think I would say that the first and the main consideration is just to be clear about things. Like start off with a blank slate and a clear an openness about one's finances. Yeah. So coming into the relationship and disclosing, what properties does one own? What savings do they have? What pensions do you have? And indeed also, what liabilities, what debt you might owe. Yeah. So being really open about business interests, it's not the most romantic, I suppose, but if you want to start off on the front foot, being open about your finances, you're much less likely for there to be potential tensions later on in life or later on in the marriage. So, having a really open conversation about one's goals, an open conversation about who's going to pay the bills, who's going to be saving money, and what a couple's long-term objectives might be. That's really going to help solve a lot of the financial constraints you might have if the relationship breaks down.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, ideally, they would do that even in the first marriage, but it's true that if it's a second marriage, there's usually more that's been accumulated, more wealth at play at that stage. And so having those conversations early on, and maybe even conversations around how they would see things happening and unfolding if the marriage did work. And I think there is a certain degree of learning from a first divorce that hopefully people bring to the table when they're approaching the second engagement.
Yeah, I mean, the other side of that is you could feel that you want to be really well protected because of the mistakes that took place in the past. I want to avoid those again. Yes. And so you might feel actually your defenses come up a bit more. I've had lots of experience where the best sorts of relationships from a financial perspective, where there's complete openness around the finances. And I've actually working on a case this week, in fact, where the individuals have come out of a first marriage, so it's a second marriage for both of them, and they have sent me through their asset summary. We're having a meeting later on. One of these individuals is a client of mine, so it's to introduce the new wife. Yes. And we're literally going to go through all of the assets, and from there we can have a really good conversation about, look, what's it for? Who's it for? Who's important to both parties? What provisions are going to be made for children from a first marriage, or indeed to look after, in this case, the wife who hasn't had the resources that the husband had in the first instance. Yeah.
And I guess it has a knock-on effect on things like wills and other arrangements that they might put in place to protect either children or the other spouse or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the first part is just to be clear about things, but you're right. Then you've got some planning that one can take into account, some tools that you could use. And certainly when you're thinking about children, that's where it becomes really, really fundamental. So from there, you might want to think, look, what assets are we going to separate from this marriage? And some individuals that have already been divorced might have understood this concept of non-matrimonial assets, or assets that were kind of built up before the marriage. And this is exactly what we're talking about here. So what assets might be kept separate? So maybe it was inheritance, gift from a grandparent, or whatever it is that actually would like to be separate to this particular relationship. Or indeed, it could be that there's a business interest. So for the obvious reasons, it makes sense that maybe that is separate, but maybe wealth that's generated from it might be part of the ongoing relationship. And so I think there are three practical routes that one could take. As I said, thinking about separation of assets. And if there is, a property that's going to be left to children, or you've kind of notionally just, thought, actually, this is going to go to my kids. If they're old enough, maybe you look to gift it in advance.
Yes.
Or indeed, if there are other assets you want to make sure are in your children's names, using ISAs and junior ISAs and pensions, kind of those investment things, which are effectively then belong to those children, kind of can protect them.
Yes.
From the breakdown of a relationship. The second route, and probably the most important, is the use of a will.
Yes.
All right. So on remarriage, in fact, on divorce, the will becomes null and void in any case. And without a will, the rules of intestacy apply. And I don't want to necessarily get into all the details of it, but you cannot assume that as a surviving spouse, you're going to receive all of your deceased partner's estate. And indeed, the rules are, they end up being like, as an individual, your children might get less than half the value of the estate if you die without a will. So having a will in place right at the outset, when you're talking about assets, then becomes really important. And then the final one, which again involves a lawyer, is potentially use of trusts.
Yes.
So a trust is just it's just a way of holding assets. And what it can do is it can ensure that a spouse is looked after in the event that they survive their partner, but ultimately the assets then pass to the former's children. Yes. So you've got lots of tools there. All of them we can talk about if you want to, but I would say those are kind of like the three main planning ones that you might want to consider.
Yeah, and I think they all tap into a concern that I hear a lot is, how do I protect my children from the previous marriage, and make sure, if I were to pass, yes, I might want my new spouse to get some of it, but I want to make sure that my children also get some of it, and that money doesn't then go down through my spouse to their children. And so how do you arrange those kind of ring fencings to try and protect the interest of your children from your first marriage?
Yes. So right now, and it's very topical because we've got a budget coming up as well.
Yes.
And there are some concerns that maybe some of the rules around gifting might disappear. So you could always put assets in your children's name.
Yes.
So that's a really good starting point. Certainly, if you've given it away, then it can't be spent by in the new marriage or be passed to the new to the new wife or husband.
But they need to be a certain age, don't they, for there to be a gift?
Yeah, so long as they're old enough, so after the age of 18, then you can gift assets directly. Okay. They can things like property can be held in bare trust. So effectively, it has been given away, but the minor can't have and I don't want to get too technical, can't have it until they're 18 in any case. But something far simpler, like funding someone's JISA, like a junior ISA, is a really good way of doing it. It becomes theirs, it's the child's, and nobody else has access to it.
Yeah. And so with regards to what you were saying earlier and trying to protect premarital assets, I'm assuming prenups and postnups might be a really helpful tool and maybe even more important than in a first marriage.
Yeah, and I think a lot of clients that go into second marriages are very aware and kind of quite keen, and it's quite normal. It's not solely for the ultra wealthy. They're a really good planning tool, and I think if you go into the marriage thinking about a prenup or indeed a postnup just as a planning tool, just so we all know where we stand, it's quite a healthy, open way of talking about things.
Yes, I think in a first marriage, a lot of the time it's seen as something that's not very romantic, and there's maybe more illusion about the marriage lasting forever. But when it's a second marriage and
Yeah.
you've experienced the breakdown of a marriage, you're much more aware of the importance of that kind of planning.
Yeah, and look, 100%. And I would say the majority of second marriages that I work with, there is a prenup or postnup to a certain degree, and people go into it wanting to protect their children and maybe assets they built up historically. I mean, they're, as I'm sure you know, they're not automatically binding contracts, but the courts do take them really seriously, and so long as they're fair, and you've probably had someone on your podcast talking about this better than I'm going to be able to. If everyone's taken advice, you're not being asked to sign it, the night before your wedding and all this kind of stuff, and that people are open about the finances.
Yeah, you need a disclosure. Absolutely, it's true. They're not upheld systematically, but they do signify quite an intent, and I think the courts are increasingly looking at them as something to really consider in how they're going to split finances on divorce.
Yeah, totally. It's also going to reduce stress for that might maybe uncertain about the financial future. Yeah, and just by having it written down, rather than we said we were going to split these things up and. Relying on memory is not the best way to go about this. And in fact, I had a meeting with some clients probably about 2 weeks ago, and actually it wasn't on divorce, but both individuals had lost their first partners and were remarrying. Yeah, and it happened. We were talking about, look, maybe it might be a good idea to put some assets together, and we might want to talk about this. And what they would keep separate to the conversation we were having earlier on. And not quite a domestic started to erupt, but certainly they were somewhat arguing about, no, we said it was from this date or this amount, and I don't remember that. And it was just kind of, but they actually did resolve it pretty quickly. They're a really lovely, lovely couple. But, by having something written down where you kind of agree things, a prenup allows you to do that. But even if without a prenup, just having some simple rules on a piece of paper is going to alleviate a lot of heartache.
Yes, and even if everyone's in good faith, it avoids any misunderstanding or poor memory problems.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I would just add one more thing as well, just about, the same thing goes for a cohabitation agreement as well. Yes, so it's exactly the same. So even if you're not getting married, unmarried couples don't have the same rights as married individuals. So rules of intestacy don't apply. There's no rights to remain living in a property and so on and so forth. So, and not only that, let's say you've got a mortgage and one, the other individual is maybe paying the mortgage, you can end up in some horrible disputes. So by having a clear picture, whether that is a formal or informal basis, whether it's a prenup, postnup or cohabitation agreement, these are all really sensible planning things to look at.
That makes a lot of sense. And so on the ground in practice, once that couple, gets married or they're in the early stages of settling into that marriage, how should they go about blending their finances? So I'm thinking properties, one might move into the other person's home, any pensions and stuff like that. How would they make sure that everything is safeguarded in case things don't go to plan?
Yeah, so now I'm a financial planner, so this is the bit that I, can get, super excited about. There's no one size that fits all. There's lots of ways of doing this. Yeah. And, it should be a science, but it definitely isn't. People, not necessarily everyone's completely rational about where we hold assets. And there's going to be personal views that you'll have about, as I say, an inheritance or your first property that you bought or whatever it might be.
Exactly.
So you might just want to start off with some simple rules about, a joint account for shared bills.
Yes.
Start off on basic level, and then you have your own personal accounts for spending, or maybe personal accounts for when you're helping your own children or whatever it might be. So that makes things really easy about who's paying for what, and it avoids some confusion. When you start blending assets more materially, there are big advantages because you can double up and use lots of allowances and exemptions that are available. You've also got this fundamental exemption there's a spousal exemption, so you don't pay any tax when you transfer between one spouse or another. Yes. So it's definitely a really good planning tool. So let's start off on property. In England, England and Wales, I don't want to talk about Scotland, to be perfectly honest. I'm sure this is still the same, but in England and Wales, certainly, there's a couple of ways that you can own property. You can own it jointly. So if anything happens to one spouse, the asset's getting passed over to another.
Yes.
But in that instance, children, future generations, whatever it might be, aren't going to own any of that property. That property goes from one person to the other solely.
Yes.
The other is having a share of the property or tenancy in common, where you can specifically say how much of the asset goes to how much you own and how much is part of the estate, which is then distributed in line with the will. So in terms of property, you may want, if it's owned jointly, your half to be passed to your children. And therefore you go down that second route. Where property can be really interesting is if there's rental income that's being generated. It may be beneficial for that property to be split so that both income sits on two people. Or indeed, if someone's an additional rate taxpayer and someone is a nil rate taxpayer, moving all of that property or the income from that property over to the lower taxpayer.
There's tax implications, of course.
Yeah, so it would be potentially you can get more of the rental income rather than paying virtually half of it in tax. Potentially, we're paying no tax or 20% of tax. There's lots of things you can do with property, and indeed, some of our more sophisticated clients might put some property into a company, and then you can have different share ownerships of the company. But broadly, that's a really interesting thing to do, particularly when you've got two individuals that have maybe had existing homes and they're coming together in a new family home. That might leave rental properties to be considered.
Yeah.
Then we've got things like pensions.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
And because of the nature of how pensions get split on divorce, most individuals, when they come to a second marriage, may actually have, both parties will have pensions. The pension is the only time it can really be transferred is on death or on divorce. Okay, so you can't move things around between married couples. But what is really important is to make sure that the expression of wish associated with a pension is nominated to either to your children or to the spouse. What I mean by that is in the event of one's death, those pension benefits are going to get paid out to someone. So do you want them to go to your children or to grandchildren, or do you want them to go to the surviving spouse, or a combination of the two? So that one really shouldn't be overlooked. It's a really important aspect, and I can't stress that one enough. And then the other thing is on defined benefit pensions. So some individuals have final salaries.
Yes.
This is where there's a guaranteed level of income that's going to get paid in the event of someone's death. In that instance, you want to make sure that you're married so that you can receive spousal benefits, but make sure that that spouse is nominated to receive them as well.
Yes. And I guess it's the same with life insurance, isn't it?
Totally. So with the nomination of beneficiaries on pensions, you have to make sure it's the same thing with death in service at work. If someone is employed, whilst the trustees would typically, if they were married, they should still pay out to the spouse. But if you want your children to receive the funds, they might not receive them. So making sure that these forms are completed, these expressions of wish and nominated beneficiaries are nominated with the pension provider or with the life company.
And I think it's something people will forget. I mean, I know myself, I realized only about 2 years ago that I didn't have a beneficiary listed on my pension accounts. It's somehow not a mandatory field.
It's so common. And the amount of times we'll look at people's legacy pensions from 10 or 20 years ago and no one has been nominated.
Yeah.
And sometimes the benefits can disappear if there's no nominated beneficiary as well. So it's really important to conduct a review on all of the investments just to make sure that either the spouse or children are nominated where you want them to be nominated.
Absolutely. So in terms of someone who's about to remarry and who wants to protect their assets, but also wants to make sure that they're building financial trust with their new partner, what would be your top tips to them?
So I think you've got to start off with making sure that there's a will in place. Fundamentally, if you want assets to pass to your children, you want to protect the wealth that you've built up, that it's not potentially, and this is only in the breakdown of a second marriage, going to your future spouse's their family, then having a will in place, making sure that it does what you'd want it to do in the event of death is really important. And there are provisions that you can make to ensure that your spouse is looked after, but also your children are considered.
Yes, exactly.
So top of the list is going to be the will. Then this conversation around like just being open and just being clear about things, where assets are, who they're for, who's paying the bills, like that kind of conversation is really important. And I suspect doesn't happen that often.
No, it should definitely happen more among all couples, actually.
No, totally. And in fact, having a professional, so maybe I would say this because this is my world, but having a financial advisor or a wealth manager where you constantly come back to these kind of points and you make sure that they're all being checked off is also really important. I have heard this idea of having, a financial date night kind of thing with like, you sit down with your spreadsheet and your assets and you talk about, what we're going to do, what holidays we're going to have. If that conversation goes well, rather than it being a glass of wine, you can have a bottle of champagne the next time round. Just by talking and being clear about what's it for and who's it for, and being open. And the earlier you do that, the easier it then becomes. Leaving it 5 years, 6 years, then it's a bit more of a challenging conversation.
But the thing to keep in mind as well is that the value of that disclosure is also if something were to happen to one of the spouses. If one of them suddenly passes away and the surviving spouse doesn't know where the assets are, doesn't know what pensions they have, that can be a really distressing process to go through at a time where you're grieving, trying to dig around, finding all the different assets that the other spouse had because you haven't been kept in the loop.
And look, 100%, and I always look to do this, even where we work with clients, husband and wife, but maybe one of those individuals is interested in the finances, and invariably the wife doesn't, kind of defers everything to the husband. I would always, and I don't want to generalize, but invariably that's kind of 80-20 kind of rule. You
divide to conquer inevitably.
What I want to do is ensure that the other spouse is in the room, right? This is, you might not be interested in what's going on under the bonnet, but the big picture is, look, we're working towards a retirement of X point, and we want to allocate a holiday budget of Y. Do you think that's a good idea? Is that enough? Is there not? There are definitely ways of being involved, but having involvement and ownership, knowing where things are, and like I say, having a plan in place are all things that are really sensible. And then a couple of other things I'd suggest as well, as we've already spoken about the will, but updating forms, nomination of beneficiaries, all of those kind of things we've spoken about, speaking to life companies. But if you are going to mix assets, I actually think taking advice at that point is really important. So if you want to change the ownership of a property, you're going to have to go see a conveyancer anyway and speak to a lawyer. So it's quite hard to do that without that conversation. But does it make sense if there's lots of properties, maybe to set up a company, right? Is that a sensible thing to do? Yes or no? If there are, if you're going to be getting remarried, having prenups and postnups put in place, again, you need to go and speak to a lawyer to allow you to do that. If you're thinking about transferring assets to save tax, again, having a financial planner, a wealth manager that can understand the impact of looking to do that, or where the opportunities are. The other thing we haven't really spoken about is where there are investment assets that have got large gains on them, might be sensible to transfer them to the spouse who doesn't have any gains or has losses. Again, there's lots of opportunities to save tax and have a bigger pot if you think more carefully about it. But when you pull on one string, it might have another impact somewhere else. So you've left everything to your spouse. Have you thought about what happens to your children on the other side? So those would be maybe my top tips.
Those are great. And I think that's a really good point. It's, every family is going to be different. Every person in the couple is going to have a different priority, whether it's protecting their children or specific asset or business, whatever it is. And that's where speaking to somebody like you is going to make such a difference, because you can really tailor that planning to their situation, their priorities, what it is they're trying to achieve, really.
Yeah, I mean, you've done my sales pitch for me. I mean, whether that's me or to a family lawyer, or to an accountant, like if you're making big decisions, you want to look to take advice and get professional advice on it, so that it's structured in the right way. Buy cheap, buy twice kind of thing. You can do something off the peg, but it might not do what you'd want it to do. And falling foul of these things, not having nomination of beneficiaries in place, not assigning assets in the right way, can actually do you more harm than good.
Yeah, especially with the tax implications that a lot of people don't think about. The other thing, before we wrap up, is these things evolve. Families evolve. Children get married. Children, leave the home. You have new children in this new marriage, etc. So how often do you recommend people review these plans and update their investment portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. So I'm trying to think back to, if you don't have a plan in place, you have these you can have these wine evenings or date night finances. Yeah. Every once in a while is probably a good idea, but certainly having a review once a year is a really important aspect. Investments can move quite quickly. So we like to say to clients, like, we should probably have a catch up on investments every 6 months, with a financial planning discussion at least once a year. That said, legislation is constantly changing. It's really important that one checks in. And clearly, every time there is a major event, and that may be on remarriage, birth of a child or grandchild, or indeed if there's loss of capacity or ill health, those are all kind of trigger points that actually say this is a good time to have a conversation with a professional.
Yeah, because the reality has changed, really. You're not looking at the same facts when you're making those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Health is a really big one. And maybe it's worth just making another point on, which is more to do with the lawyers, is, if you're putting in place prenups and cohabitation agreements and wills, it's just as important to have lasting powers of attorney in place, that if you cannot act, because you lose mental capacity or because of ill health, someone that is able to pick up your finances, your new husband or wife, given the conversation we're having, is also pretty fundamental.
Yes, that's a very good point. And I think one that people, again, very often overlook.
Yeah, no, indeed. Look, there is probably a whole checklist of things that one can do. But certainly starting off with an open conversation and a blank sheet of paper, and agreeing what the financial future looks like together, what the plans are together, who's important and what's important, I think would be a really great starting point.
It sounds like it. I agree. Thank you so much, Ben. So many helpful tips and really practical things that people can do. And I think it'll help a lot of people who are going through this new stage of their life, and just making sure that they have all their ducks in a row before they get remarried. How can people reach out to you? Do you want to share your email address? I'll put it in the notes as well.
Yeah, probably in the notes. But I'm one of the partners at Evelyn Partners, so I'm sure that Googling my name will probably
it comes right
release
up.
something. We work on a collaborative pod together in any case. So again, probably Googling your name will probably show up mine somewhere as well.
That's true as well.
But rather than me reading out my email address, well, I suppose it's ben.glassman@evelyn.com. We can find something in the notes, or you can Google me and I'm sure that I'll come up.
Yes, I'll put your email address, and I'll put Evelyn Partners' website as well, so that they can locate you easily if they need your help. Thank you so much, Ben.
Yeah, thank you ever so much for having me. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Yeah, bye. Cheers, eh?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode